it's 6 o'clock. Welcome everybody. I'd like to call the June 14th, 2021 West Sacramento Environment and Utilities Commission meeting to order. Pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N2920, the members of the Environment and Utilities Commission and staff are meeting via teleconference to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Members of the public have been invited to watch the meeting via Wave Cable Channel 20 or streaming online through the city's website. Tonight's agenda and all the items on the agenda are available on the city's website on the Environment.
This meeting is being recorded.
Commission page. All public comments submitted by 5 p.m. via email to the Environment Utilities Clerk are available for consideration and are posted on the city website, along with the agenda and the link to the live streaming. The Commission Clerk will note the commenters for each item, and the comments shall become part of the public meeting record. All right, and with that, we'll proceed to tonight's agenda. First, General Administration Function Part 1. Presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the Commission. Do we have any presentations?
We have no written comment. I do know we have a few participants in the meeting that I don't recognize. So if anybody wishes to speak on item 1A, please let me know. I think we're okay.
Okay, I think we're good. Okay, great. Disclosure of ex parte communications. Environment Utilities Commissioners should disclose any communications they have had on the agenda items at this time. So has anybody had any ex parte communications? No. Okay, great. Consent agenda. Consideration of the approval of the minutes of the April 12th, 2021 Environment Utilities Commission. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Who said that? Was that Commissioner Green?
Yes.
Would anybody like to second?
I'll second that, Commissioner Petrie.
Okay, Commissioner Green and Commissioner Petrie moved and seconded.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm just wondering on the format of the agenda item. So I'm new to this. So entry number 4, it just says, we heard the presentation on climate action plan and we provided feedback and direction to staff. I don't know to the extent of how agendas should be, or the minutes should be documented. I know there's a lot of back and forth, and I don't know if the feedback, bullet points or something that says exactly what the feedback was in general. Because as I look at these and trying to remember what 2 months ago we did, sometimes it's a little difficult. We do have the videos to go to, so at least there's that reference, but I don't know how standalone these minutes should be to say, yep, if you were not there, you should be able to look at these minutes, and I don't know what details should be in these things.
Ben, do you want to address that, or?
Yeah, so typically the minutes are fairly brief and just kind of give a summation about what happened at the meeting, not so much what was exactly said. This is standard practice for both the Environment Utilities Commission, the City Council, and Planning Commission, along with the other commissions.
Thanks, Ben.
And there are the items posted to the website for the public to review if they have questions.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. All right.
So we need to do a roll call vote now because we have a second.
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Blondo?
Yes. I'll second. You need a second. Is that what it is?
No, we have a second. It's a roll call vote.
Oh, aye.
Commissioner Solario?
Present.
It's a aye or, yeah, okay.
What was that?
Commissioner Criswell?
Here, aye.
Commissioner Green?
Aye.
Commissioner Petrie?
Aye.
Commissioner Chilano,
Aye.
Chair Cordano.
Aye. All right, the minutes have been approved. So we'll go to our regular agenda. Item 3, consideration of an update on planning and implementation efforts related to Senate Bill 1383, short-lived climate pollutants.
Yes, hello, good evening, Commissioners. Paulina Benner, Environmental Services Manager. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an update on where we are in planning and implementing SB 1383 regulations, and also just to get some feedback and support on several key recommendations for implementation options. Tonight I have Garth Schultz and Rosemary Radford from R3 Consulting Group. That's the consultant that we have selected to work with us and help us through this process. They have a wealth of experience in SB 1383 implementation planning and the various other waste reduction and recycling efforts. So this evening, Garth will run through a slideshow presentation, and we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and then to discuss these key recommendation areas that we're talking about. So I'll turn it over to Garth to do his presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paulina, and thanks for having us this evening, Commissioners. It's our pleasure to be in front of you. I believe that Ben has the slide deck. If not, I can also pull it up and share. With respect to what we'll cover tonight, it's an update on the process for setting up the city for compliance with SB 1383 regulations. As Paulina mentioned, we do this for cities and towns and counties all over the state. Just as a point of reference, in terms of us as a firm, we work exclusively for local government agencies on matters such as state compliance, contract, procurement and evaluation, rate setting and the like. So we work at the behest of municipal agencies and their ratepayers in matters such as these. So it's our pleasure to be before you. Should I pull up the presentation, or Ben, do you have it available? Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. Excellent. Okay. So we can go on to the agenda slide. This is just kind of what we'll cover for you. We know that the Commission has received a bit of information with respect to SB 1383 back in December, but that not all of you were necessarily at that meeting. So we'll give you a quick refresher on SB 1383 and what it means. We could take hours just doing that, so it will be fairly high level. But then we'll move directly into findings and policy recommendations that we've established thus far, and then seek questions and answers from the Commission, some discussion, and give you a preview of next steps. Next slide, please. So by way of background, SB 1383, also known as the Short-Lived Climate Pollution Reduction Act, takes effect January 1, 2022. And I'll cover that on the next slide. It's really this date that is driving current activities to set up not just the city of West Sacramento, but every other city, county, special district, town throughout the entire state. So there's a big push statewide to make ready for this compliance activity. R3 has been engaged by the city to conduct a variety of analyses and then set up recommendations for compliance. So most of what we have to report out to you this evening is a compliance gap analysis, literally looking at the 180 pages of regulations, find out where the city's currently set up to be in compliance, and identify the concrete actions or programs or policies that need to be established to effectuate compliance. So that's the compliance gap. We've also completed an initial resource gap analysis, which is looking at what revenues and other resources are needed in order to implement the law. And we'll be working next on a rate analysis and a compliance plan and supporting the city in adoption of new municipal code language. In terms of next steps, this isn't your only, oh, that's much better. Thank you, Ben. In terms of next steps, those are listed here. You can kind of see the next points. We'll have another opportunity to engage the Commission as we go into those next steps as well. So we'll go ahead into the next slide. Thank you, sir. Okay, so brief refresher on SB 1383. At its core, this isn't really a solid waste law. It's a greenhouse gas reduction law. in that sense, it will actually help the city in its achievement of its climate action objectives and policies as they relate to waste and recycling. And on a broad scale across the state, it's aiming to reduce the amounts of organic waste to landfill by 75% by 2025. A really, tall target. I mean, this law has turned the solid waste industry upside down in a good way over the course of the last couple of years in both its assertiveness towards reducing organic wastes in landfills and thereby reducing methane emissions that are generated when organic waste decomposes of in landfills, but also in terms of just the speed by which the state is seeking to undertake these requirements. Many of you may have some recollection of AB 939, which was enacted in 1989 and set the first statewide policy objective of 50% recycling by the year 2000. That was a landmark that completely changed the landscape of solid waste and recycling in California. This is tantamount to that and in many ways more impressive and more far-reaching than that original law. In summary, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in the following slides, SB 1383 requires, the city to, ensure and enforce mandatory subscription to organics collection by all organics waste generators, meaning everyone in the city, residents, businesses, multifamily complexes, government institutions. Everyone's got to subscribe to and participate in organic waste green bin collection services. There's also specific requirements for outreach and education, but really most importantly, in relating to most of where the city's efforts will need to be placed, inspect and enforce via municipal code violations, compliance with the law over the course of time. There are a couple of Easter egg level aspects of the law. One delves into food security and ensuring a recovery of edible food for human consumption from edible food generators. So this isn't just about reducing organics in landfills, it's also about highest and best use of those organic materials. And the law seeks to close the loop on organic waste by requiring local governments to procure materials or products made from organic waste materials. And we'll cover both of those in a little more detail in terms of the city's actions in the next slides. So far-reaching, big target. We'll go on the next slide, please. Many of you may have a sense of what we mean by organics, but this slide is just to kind of solidify that a bit further. So it's not just the typical things that folks think of in their green bin, such as grass clippings or leaves or branches or garden waste, but it also extends to leftover food scraps, food soiled papers, items that were contained from a pizza box or a takeout container, edible food, obviously I mentioned before, but also it also fits within standard recyclable materials, things that we think of as commonly recycled paper, cardboard, but really literally anything that comes from a living thing originally fits within the scope, and some things that arguably aren't living things. So it is very far reaching in terms of the breadth of what organics means. And so this isn't just about green bins, it's also about participating in recycling programs and having access to recycled paper opportunities as well. Next slide. So this is the state's, it was one of the state's slides, just kind of demonstrating both the timeline to where we got now, and in red in the middle is really the key reason that we're before the commission tonight and that the city's undertaking these activities. That is, CalRecycle expects adoption of a mandatory ordinance requiring subscription to organic service by January 1. That's one of the key milestones they're looking at. Other aspects of the law also become enforceable on this date, though there is some flexibility in timing and level of effort. Over the course of COVID, there's been especially some changes in interpretation by CalRecycle. But in essence, they want to know that you've got a plan in place to meet the requirements of the law and have your ordinance in place by January 1, 2022. So that's the main thrust of the efforts we're undertaking now. Importantly, another key date that's up there as it relates to some of the policy considerations that we'll ask the commission about is this January 1st, 2024. This is when the state is saying you must enforce monetary penalties on those organic waste generators who do not participate in organic service. You must do that by 2024, meaning issuing penalties via the municipal code. Between now and then, there's a ramp-up period expected to go from 0 to 60, but the state, if any agency that doesn't enforce its own mandatory ordinance, the state has said we will enforce on you. So that's the next key milestone to be looking at. Next slide, please. And these are descriptive of the broad categories of areas. I covered them primarily, but organic collection service to all is really first and foremost. It's most of their level of effort. You do need to have a plan for an edible food recovery program. We'll cover that in the next slide. Outreach and education and monitoring compliance and conducting enforcement are really two sides of the same coin. So you'll see those combined in one slide. And then the procurement of organic materials is also there. So it's when we're discussing implementation with Paulina and her staff, we're really looking at each of these 6 broad categories. Not all of them are relevant to what we have to share with the commission tonight, but many of them are. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're in the meat, and I will slow down. This is relating to our findings from our compliance gap analysis and certain policy considerations on which we're seeking the commission's feedback. So with respect to solid waste collection operations, these are the door-to-door operations provided by Waste Management for residents throughout the city, and also Waste Management for garbage collected in bins from commercial customers. This also pertains to other haulers that are active in the city via permit within the commercial space. So those haulers go through the community today, and they already collect their organics that are required to be collected under state law. So the good news for City of West Sacramento is the primary activity that needs to be conducted is already out there. It's just about establishing expectations from customers that they must subscribe and then following up with enforcement. So good news on that front. There are some areas around the margin where the city will need to take additional activities. Such as periodically reviewing containers on routes, the collection routes for contamination, meaning garbage in the organics bin or recycling in the organics bin or vice versa. So there's expectation that that be done on a regular basis, as well as education to customers on an annual basis containing certain key points of information that are prescribed within the law itself. So both of these activities, they can be provided by the city or by the haulers or other third parties. Which specific avenue the city is going to undertake still remains to be determined, but we know this is an activity that needs to be planned on and implemented starting here in 2022. One point of policy consideration is relating to the concept of universally providing organics to all customers. For your residential customers, that's essentially in effect via your agreement with Waste Management. But in the commercial space, because you've got a non-exclusive permit system, it's not realistic to require haulers to provide it because the customer has choice. So in terms of policy considerations, the recommendation from R3 and staff is to maintain the current non-exclusive system for commercial customers, allow for that choice within the marketplace, but then place the onus for subscribing onto the customer or waste generator itself. And that's to preserve the benefits that your current non-exclusive, meaning open market system has for your commercial customers. So, again, the good news here, you're doing most of what you need to do. You've got a couple of additional services that you need to secure for, and you have choice around how you secure for those services. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one's kind of the biggie, and there's a lot on this slide, forgive me. And there's two sides of the same coin, and both introducing mandatory subscription requirements, meaning you have to subscribe to and use the organic service. The state says that needs to be codified within the municipal code. It's the primary thing they're looking to by January 1. But then you also need to inspect to ensure that folks are subscribed. So it can be an annual process to look and say, of all the customers in the city, do they have a subscription account to organics and recycling with the waste hauler? But then beyond that, outside of inspection, when there's a report of either through field observation or say a complaint that a solid waste customer or generator isn't participating in the mandatory program, then there has to be an enforcement via penalty that follows. So, and of course, outreach and education will be a key part of the overall process, making sure that folks are aware of their requirements, know what they need to do, know how they can do it. That's all a key a key pathway that we know the city's going to undertake, and it fits within the city's existing programs. But the main policy consideration before you is that between having a mandatory ordinance go into effect January 1, 2022, and having to enforce on that ordinance by 2024, you can have a flexible approach to how you're enforcing. And so the recommendation from staff and from R3 is to have progressive enforcement, start with, kind of notices of perceived non-compliance, say in 2022, and then in 2023, move into something that looks more like a pre-notice of violation and a heads up on what the future penalties for not complying with the ordinance may be. And then by 2024, essentially have knowledge saturation amongst the subscribers, the customers, about what is expected and how. And of course, from outreach and education, that will go along with it. So really, this is one overall recommendation, which is have a progressive approach to enforcement and outreach and education during the course of this 2 years. Next slide. Okay, edible food recovery program, a whole new animal for folks like Paulina and us in terms of our engagement with solid waste generators and haulers. So, this requires a whole new program to be put in place. There isn't anything existing like it for the city in their management, but there are edible food recovery organizations that already exist and do business in the West Sacramento and broader regional community. So in essence, folks who generate edible food, and there are certain types of businesses that qualify, and to the extent there's questions about which kind of business, I'll tap Rose in for her expertise. But if you're identified as an edible food recovery or edible food generator, you must have an agreement with an edible food recovery organization where you'll get the edible food to them and they'll take it. So you're required to donate edible food essentially and maintain very good records about what you're doing and why and the amounts. And when Paulina or her staff or a designated enforcement representative comes around asking for the records, you have to provide it. Beyond that, the law is seeking to ramp up the amount of edible food recovery activity, meaning there may be a need for additional capacity, new infrastructure, vehicles, connections to other, food insecure populations. So the city is also required to fund the provision of that additional capacity if it's found to be needed. We have some estimates, and we'll show kind of a broad estimate of the costs. There's some estimates of what that may cost, but it is kind of the most unknown portion of this at this point, because it's not clear how much additional capacity would be needed, who would need to be funded, and how much funding would actually be necessary. From a policy consideration standpoint, what staff and R3 recommend for the commission's consideration is to allow edible food recovery generators to donate to any eligible food recovery organization and not specify a particular organization or set of organizations. They can comply for so long as they demonstrate we've got that written agreement, we're recovering or donating edible food, and we're maintaining our records of compliance. Next slide, please. I think we're in the home stretch. I realize I've thrown a lot of information your way already. The purchasing requirements are a little more fine grained and really just relate to specific policies the city has to adopt, but also procurement activities that the city must undertake. So on the fairly straightforward side is the city is required to procure recycled paper for paper uses within the city. That's a fairly straightforward exercise. Less straightforward is this organic waste material procurement, essentially saying you must procure a targeted amount of compost or mulch or electricity or gas derived from an organic waste generated process. And those latter two are very challenging to find any available capacity that the city can procure from. Bottom line is that it's a pretty high target. The state should be commended for trying to close the loop, but it's not going to be achievable in the near term. So the exercise that we're undertaking with city staff is to start the process of demonstrating additional procurement of this organic waste product so that we can demonstrate good faith effort to the state. But meeting the entirety of the target is not going to be achievable, at least not in the near term. One such way that can be conducted is by procuring or getting from a waste hauler compost and mulch and then making it available to city residents. So the kicker here is that the city doesn't have to use the compost or the mulch, just has to procure it. You could give it to city residents, you can give it to other cities entirely. The recommendation on the table is to provide, available compost or mulch to city residents for pickup. And some of the policy considerations we would ask of the commission are, would that be more advantageous to have in specific events or on a year-round basis? Would it be most advantageous to have that at some sort of a city location like a corporation yard or other locations? So this isn't the entirety of the purchasing requirement, but it is one that interacts within the public space. Next slide, please. Okay, so the final thing when all of this is said and done is this requires some amount of additional resources for the city to implement. That's true all up and down the state. Through the law as it was adopted, the law recognizes this is an unfunded mandate, and the city may establish fees to cover the cost of that unfunded mandate. Typically, this is being done via a fee that's passed on to the solid waste haulers like Waste Management and your permitted haulers. We have a magnitude here. It's somewhere in the $400,000 to $800,000 range. We think probably on the lower end, but I put a higher end up there just because we really can't be held to the magnitude of it at this point until we finish some of the analyses. If passed on to the haulers, haulers will likely seek to recoup that cost through changes to their rates. And what magnitude of change to the rate, we don't yet know. That is something we'll be coming back to staff and the commission with once we have our rate analysis completed. But from a policy consideration standpoint, the question to the commission is, do you find it most appropriate to fund those costs through something like the SB 1383 fee to the haulers, which is becoming fairly common, and then that goes to the ratepayers, or should there be some direction to consider other sources for portions of this? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be SB 1383 fee for inspection and enforcement, and some other source, say for edible food capacity. This is an open question. There's definitely no standard across the state, though we do know if it's not the SB 1383 fee, it's got to be money from somewhere. And the question is where. And the bottom line, if it's not the SB 1383 fee and there's no other eligible funding that is identified, it comes to the general fund, which may not be ideal. Next slide, please. Okay, we've reached the home stretch. Thank you for bearing with me. We'll take your questions and answers. We've summarized the areas of policy consideration, reflecting the slides that you just saw here on this slide. And then we'll be completing or finalizing the gap analyses, preparing a rate analysis, which will give the anticipated impacts to ratepayers, not just from the city's funding needs, but also if there are programmatic needs that affect the hauling operations, such as increases in the costs of composting. Any of those will be reflected in that rate analysis. And then we'll have a plan for city's overall compliance. We'll return to the commission, and then the kind of final stage is supporting adoption of an updated ordinance municipal code coming up this fall. And with that, the final slide is just a thank you, and I'll shut up now and let you ask your questions and deliberate as a commission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have comments or questions? Commissioner Criswell.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just have a question around the mulching and compost. What's kind of the reasoning behind requiring the city to give away mulching and compost? Is that just to have an outlet, establish an outlet for it to give it some place to go besides landfill, or what's the reason for that?
Good question. So the reason is to drive market demand for organic waste products, because they're saying you've got to get it out of the landfill and you've got to do something else with it. Composting, anaerobic digestion, energy production, whatever it is, they want to ensure as a product then it needs some market demand to do something with it. So they're trying to force demand and therefore of a supply that they're also forcing. So simultaneously, the state's saying we're going to increase the supply of organic waste products because we're not allowing it to go to landfill. we want to force an increase in the demand at the same time. A point of clarification though, Commissioner, the state's not saying you have to give away compost or mulch. That's just an alternative you have at your disposal, no pun intended. They're just saying you've got to procure it. You have to procure it. Where you use it, how you use it, whether it's compost or mulch or electricity from organic waste derived products, they're agnostic about that. You just got to procure. That's where they're saying the requirement lies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm not sure who's put up their hand first, but Commissioner Petrie.
Yes. So I was wondering, I had a question about the energy derived from organic waste, electricity or fuel. If the city had a plan for how to procure that, if they and just because I know that right now it's hard to get electricity from these renewable sources, but I do know that as things happen and as we the Air Board implements the new scoping plan and everything for their for the new climate change actions, I'm just wondering because it seems like the last question, you just have to procure, mulch and organic waste and stuff like that. It seems like the best thing that you could do is get more, electricity or fuel. And then that way it would cover a lot of the purchasing requirements. Does the city have a plan for how they're going to do that and kind of a list of sources that they could get this renewable energy from?
Excellent question. And I'll have Rose and Paulina, I think, kind of give any details on the investigations we've done into the potential sources. The bottom line for this, for energy or gas derived from an organic waste product, there's just not that much of it, right? So it's got to be connected directly to like an anaerobic digester that's producing electricity that can be sourced through your power provider, or is capturing the gas that then kind of gets connected up to city facilities for heating use, or gas that can then be used in vehicles, either the solid waste collection vehicles or other types of vehicles. And there's just not much access to that sort of energy generation. I know we've done a little bit of initial investigation as to whether there would be some availability through the city's energy providers, and that's what I would seek to have Rose and or Paulina weigh in on as the status of that investigation.
Garth, I think you covered that really well, and it does boil down to that there's very limited sources for this at this point in time. So, I'm sure that people are aware that all of the cities are looking for this, and hopefully there'll be more availability in the future.
So maybe Commissioner Petrie, the answer to your question around the plans right now is to procure additional amounts of compost and or mulch and demonstrate, initial steps towards meeting that procurement requirement. Part of the recommendations coming out of our exercise for compliance planning is to say, seek additional opportunities with your energy providers, knowing that you're very limited by what they can offer at this point.
Okay, thank you. That definitely answers my question. I work for the Air Board in one of the low carbon fuel standard, and they do a lot with the anaerobic digestion and all those things, and lowering CI of energy is the carbon intensity of energy is something that I think about on a daily basis. So I do know that there's lots of good stuff coming. So hopefully you'll be able to find actual sources soon. So thank you.
Commissioner Blondo?
Yes, thank you. A few questions here. When we send these things in our bin and it goes to the landfill, not landfill, but the yard waste bin, aren't they making compost out of that? So that's being generated, right? And isn't that available now to the city in some way So they might be getting free compost from this process already?
I can answer that question. There is compost available at Yolo County Central Landfill. They've had some free giveaways to residents recently. They are ramping up a variety of different projects. So they're not at full capacity currently. So some of the material that they take through the landfill is then transferred to Northern Recycling's facility in Napa.
Oh.
So we are in the process of working with Yolo County Central Landfill to execute a flow agreement that would guarantee some level of free compost for residents that they would deliver to West Sacramento as part of our procurement and part of the giveaways that we just talked about. But right now, the amount being produced on site is not to a point that would meet our procurement level. I mean, just to put it in perspective, if we were going to meet our procurement target just by buying compost and mulch, I think it's like over 4,000 tons a year. We can't, I mean, we don't have a need for that, right? I mean, even all of the residents in West Sacramento would be hard pressed to put that much compost to use every single year. So as Garth mentioned, reaching that target is really a challenge. And we are, going to explore everything that comes available to us, like as Commissioner Petrie was asking about. As soon as those other, fuel options are expanded and become available to us, maybe to our hauler or otherwise, we'll explore those things. At this point, it's going to be a challenge.
Thanks. I have another question if nobody else has it. Regarding the non-exclusive rights for some of the businesses to use some other hauler and ties into the hauler fee, is that going to be enforceable if we identify a mechanism to pass the fees on to haulers, but the businesses can select whatever hauler they want, including those not in this functioning in the city? Does that work?
Yes, I mean, typically through the non-exclusive hauler permit system, you have an ability to be able to set fees there. I think the challenge is, setting fees proportionate to, number of customers or the amount of revenue derived from that hauling permit. And Paulina and Rose, correct me if I'm wrong, there's likely some element of fees already in those permits today, but through those permits is where you would have the ability to establish the magnitude of a new fee for this SB 1383 compliance. And there's information available to set that in an equitable fashion so that it's not overburdening, one contractor compared to another based on their amount of customers and revenues. Now, granted, the city doesn't have control over shifts in that playing field. So there's a possibility that a fee that's initially set to kind of be, somewhat equitable in terms of its fee assessment magnitude by hauler, that wouldn't become a little bit out of whack over the course of time. But the city gets regular reports about the activities of those haulers on an annual, I think a monthly basis, if I'm not mistaken. So there's an ability to monitor for that over the course of time. And to your prior question, Commissioner Blando, around the with the procurement of compost, there should be more of that available in the future. There are some limits in supply right now because the infeed of this new organic stream really hasn't materialized yet because they were only at the outset of implementing SB 1383. So more of that may be available in the future. The point remains, as Paulina cited, there's only so much of that can actually be distributed within a community. And it's not one-to-one. It's not like we contribute this much as a city, and so we get this much back out. They're setting it based on population, and so those two metrics are somewhat divorced from each other.
Thank you.
Commissioner Criswell, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah. I have two questions. One, the first is, what's the provision to reduce the burden of compliance for small businesses and nonprofit type of outfits where, every nickel and dime counts? And then the second part of the question is, does this system have provisions for actually incentivizing the reduction of the waste versus we're talking about where it's going to go, but how does it incentivize reducing the waste in many cases?
Excellent questions, and I'll rely on Rose to correct me if I miss any of these points, but With respect to the burden of compliance on any type of generator, the state is pretty firm. All generators of organic materials must comply. If you can prove and demonstrate that you don't generate, whether you're a nonprofit or a church or a small business, you can obtain proof that you don't generate organics. You can get a waiver from the requirement, meaning you're not required to subscribe. It's really the only exemptions are for these waivers when you can demonstrate I don't generate organic material above a certain threshold, which is pretty small. So there's not, the state is looking at this as a climate action reduction mechanism. They're saying everybody who's generating has to comply, and there really isn't any provision outside of that. With respect to incentivizing reduction, that's a real challenge in the solid waste rate setting space these days, because on the one hand, we have this expectation through solid waste policy from the last 40 years, which is, well, if we price the right activity low enough and the bad activity high enough, will generate the right behavior. And we've had 40 years of that. And it's actually yielded a lot of results, but it's also reached its limits. And it's also bounded by the expectations of state law under Prop 218, which is that you must also charge for the cost of service. And the state doesn't want to see, or this law doesn't want to see, cross subsidization between various ratepayer classes. So the expectation that you and every other ratepayer have is I'm paying my rightful costs of participating in this program for collection and disposal and processing. So in terms of incentivizing reduction, the best incentive for reduction is that irrespective of whether it's the garbage bin or the organics bin or the recycling bin, if there's less overall generation within the community, over time that will yield lower cost results. Or thinking about it from a small business perspective, if I have a large bin going several times a week now, and I'm paying hundreds of dollars a month for that service, if I reduce my waste by half all across the board, I'm reducing my bill by half. So the strongest incentive to reducing waste is the fact that they're paying for the collection and removal of that every single month. Otherwise, the state's, attitude through SB 1383 and all of the regulations and rulemaking is we're kind of in a post-incentive climate where it's now very much command and control enforcement. You shall subscribe, you shall participate in these programs. So the incentives are somewhat off the table at this point.
But like the example you used, they're paying per pickup. So if they generate the need for fewer pickups, yep, that'll let them save money, right?
Absolutely. So, that's the biggest overall thing anyone can do. And that doesn't require any new systems or methodologies, right? That's just a built-in existing part of the way solid waste structures in West Sacramento and across the state work. It's a fee for service. So if you don't need the service anymore because you're not generating as much waste in any category, your individual costs of that service will decrease.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of my own, household waste collection. You have different sizes of bins, and you can downsize the bin, to save some money. But of course, the garbage still comes just once a week, and so there's only so much potential for reduction, but there is some incentive there.
Correct. And only so much in the residential space. In the commercial space, much more potential for reduction because there's more combinations of the ways in which they can subscribe. And having done a lot of those waste assessments personally, I can tell you there's very few businesses that are really doing as much as they can. And so that incentive is built into the fact that that's part of their utility rates that they're paying in any given month. So there is more that can be done on that front. And that's the largest incentive I think that still exists today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solorio?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Garth and Rosemary, for being here and for a good, solid presentation for us. I did have a couple of questions. The first one has to do with your discussion on the fees passed on to the haulers, which then obviously will pass them on to the generators. So these fees, are you basically talking about the inevitable cost to the city to implement? Okay, so, and then I was confused about how all haulers do not have to participate. They don't have to pick up organic waste. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, for the commercial sector, because you've got an open market, non-exclusive system for organics, we can't look at any one of them and say, you must provide this to your customer, because then it eliminates the customer's choice about who they're working with to subscribe to that service. So Waste Management's the best example in this case, which is Waste Management provides the large bin garbage service. So if you're a small business or any size business and you have a large bin garbage service, which I did this, it's a front loader, just the way I think about it. Sorry, too many years in operations. But if you have the large bin garbage service, you can go subscribe with one of, I think, 8 to 10 other haulers for your organic service. So you can shop that marketplace. Meaning, if we go to Waste Management and say, you must provide the organics containers to all of your customers, we're essentially limiting that market competition and the choice for the customer. So the only point was to say, a strategy in other communities has been requiring your haulers to provide the service to everybody. That works in West Sacramento for your residential customers, but it doesn't work for your commercial customers because you have this non-exclusive system currently.
Okay. So then that would mean a generator who maybe was using a hauler that opted not to start picking up this waste stream would have to switch because they have to have this pickup.
Correct, though all of these haulers do provide it now. It's just a matter of whether they're providing it to all customers throughout the city. If they're, if you're, a small business and you're looking to have a hauler provide green service, you have choice within that. And your garbage hauler may not provide it. You can ask them about it and they will provide it if you ask, but you're not required to use it with them. You're just required to subscribe to that service with one of a suite of potential haulers.
Okay. I think it's a little clearer for me. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the whole different types of haulers and all the requirements and how that works. So a little foggy for me there, but that was helpful. Thank you. And I did have one other question. Come back to me. There's two others waiting. Go ahead.
Okay, Commissioner Green.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Garth and Rosemary, for the great presentation. I appreciate you guys providing the summary of findings for each of the gap analysis categories. That was very helpful. I just wanted to share that I concur with all of staff's recommendations for each of the categories we discussed. I did have a comment on the purchasing requirements category, specifically the options listed for the compost mulch offerings. I think it would be great if we could offer those year round at a city location so folks in West Sac don't have to go out to Woodland to pick it up at the landfill. I think the Public Works Corporation Yard is a great suggestion and kind of leveraging their business hours if we can. I think they're open Monday through Friday. And then perhaps we could bridge the gap that exists for the weekends by hosting special events on the weekends, maybe, one weekend every month or something similar to that approach. And then I had a question on the implementation costs and funding approaches category. It looks like here costs are currently estimated to be around $416,000 annually. I just wanted to see if perhaps the city has considered some of the Cal Recycle grants that are available. I think they're funded by the California Climate Investments Organization. So I just wanted to see if perhaps that would be an option for addressing some of those costs that will incur.
I'll just speak to that really quickly. I mean, we're always looking for grant opportunities. The current grants that I've seen available, and maybe Garth and Rose may have more information about that, are specific to, there's some around edible food recovery and others for infrastructure and capacity expansion, which like for the county, for example, they have secured grant funding to increase their capacity to compost at the landfill. we wouldn't be eligible because we don't have a facility. So for instance, there are some grants that aren't really ones that we would be eligible to apply for because we don't have that type of infrastructure that we're funding. But we always work with the county specifically to support their applications, letters of recommendation, and things of that nature. And if there's something that would be eligible, or that we would be eligible to apply for that would help offset costs, we would absolutely apply for that grant.
Thank you.
My only supplemental note to that response, which I totally concur with, is CalRecycle. I mean, agencies throughout the state have been asking CalRecycle to provide funding sources for this since the bill was originally passed. Even recent legislative bills to kind of amend some of the timelines around SB 1383 have made that explicit request of CalRecycle to provide funding sources for implementation. And that answer has gone unfulfilled. And it dates back, pretty much every time, and I'm summarizing, paraphrasing, I don't want CalRecycle to bite me, but it's like, their answer is you have rate making ability to collect rates to cover this cost. So use your rate making ability to do it. We don't need to generate another alternative. They use their monies for infrastructure improvements or one-time type programs, not for ongoing implementation of, essentially a perpetual mandate. So it is a good question. We're hopeful still that the state may come up with some alternative to that, but nothing exists at this point.
Appreciate that information. Thank you.
Commissioner, and I'm going to say your name wrong, Cialino?
It's Cellino.
Oh, Cellino. Okay.
Yes.
I'll write that down so I remember it.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for answering all of our questions. I guess a couple comments and then a question regarding rates. I understand CalRecycle's argument that these things can be dealt with through rate setting, but I also think the cost of starting up programs like this can be a real burden on smaller cities and towns like West Sacramento, and also a disproportionate potential burden on residents in West Sacramento that may be lower income or part of living in a disadvantaged community. So I think it's important that the city go for those grants, and that's great. But it probably makes sense to advocate with the legislature. I know the budget was passed today in the legislature. We'll see what happens when it gets to the governor. And there's still a lot of detail to be worked out. It's a historic year for California's budget, and it'd be great to see if funding could be appropriated for some of these startup costs that I think are going to be burdensome. And I guess related kind of to funding, education and outreach is so important. And just at the residential level, getting people to understand that they can put their food scraps in their yard waste bin, and making that sort of habit shift that probably is not the thing that people have been doing for many years. Is there going to be some sort of overarching campaign that it doesn't make sense to have every municipality create its own educational campaign? There should be sort of some themed messaging that the city could implement, and then of course target as needed to the different generators. But is there anything like that in the works?
There is actually, and I only happen to know about it because we're on a team with a large advertising firm that has a big contract with CalRecycle to do just that on a statewide scale. It's in its planning stage right now. They've done an initial surveying. I believe there's now a residential survey, statistical survey being implemented by others. Again, we're one part of a very large team in that sense. But there is an objective for a statewide campaign, and it's a community-based social marketing campaign that is planned for implementation. I know most of the research and analysis and development is going to continue through the course of this year, but because of SB 1383, I know they're really looking to get something kind of out in the communities come 2022, including local toolkits for cities that they can implement directly on their own, and mirroring the messages that are being engaged on at a larger statewide level. So excellent question, and yes, I just don't know what it looks like or really when it's going to come out, but there is movement afoot for that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's good to not reinvent the wheel, and then think of the water conservation messaging that really came down from the state. I think most people have seen it, and it would be great that there'll be something hopefully along those lines for this program. Thank you.
Excuse me, I was on mute. Commissioner Solorio.
Okay, let me see. I was wondering what some key reasons that R3 believes the generators need to take about 2+ years to comply. That was the time frame, the 2024, I think that you mentioned. What are the trouble areas there that we're anticipating?
It's an excellent question. I mean, I think it's not necessarily what generators will need to comply, but knowing that the state, effective January 1 of this coming year, expects you to have an enforceable ordinance, and then 2 years later, they expect you to start enforcing it with monetary penalties. Those are their dates. We're simply looking at it. It can be a progressive approach so that by the time you start enforcing, you can have a message to non-compliant generators that you have to assess penalties to. Hey, we've had a 2-year ramp up period. You've had this level of outreach, this level of education. We've given you these heads up notices that were friendly. We gave you heads up notices that were less friendly and told you what the fees were going to be. So it's really just so that you can cross all your T's and dot all your I's. Okay. Certainly at the city's discretion, you could seek to enforce the ordinance much earlier. It's just that given this 2-year window, it seems most prudent to adopt some sort of a progressive approach. In particular, and I think this gets to Commissioner Criswell's questions around incentivization, especially the smaller businesses that may be hurting in a post-COVID economy. You have an opportunity to kind of be sensitive to business interests, because really it is businesses and multifamily dwellings that are going to be the most subject to the enforcement. Single-family dwellings and single-family residents, you might have the one-off participator who just didn't know any better, but really where this is the largest barrier to implementation, or the largest amount of non-compliance, is going to come from the commercial sector, hands down.
Okay, and then this is really more of a comment as we were talking about the expected abundance of the organic waste materials, and kind of limited use of the products. Kind of what do you do with them when you have this mountain of resource? I just can't help but think of industry and what's being looked at to really leverage the industrial businesses that are within the city or very near the city. I think of the port. We talk about anaerobic digesters, and they're not really being a lot of generators. Just they're not kind of like on every block or so, but they are coming online. I mean, there's a lot of research in that area, and some that are active, at least as demonstrations. So I know they're coming. So I guess the comment is it would probably be a good use of time to really start to figure out a plan, whether it's however long term that is, 5 or 10 years, to incorporate like industrial and ag uses for all of this waste stream that we're going to have in the clean technology sector.
Thank you. That's a helpful comment. I will note a portion of the ordinance changes do set up expectations for use of, I think it's compost and or mulch in landscaping in new developments that come up, but that still doesn't count towards the city's procurement target. So it helps with the overall problem of supply and demand, but not the city's specific demand requirements, if you will. So helpful comments all around, and we'll note those and see if we have more we can include in future report outs.
Commissioner Blondo.
Yes, question again on the cost. So this thing's going to hit every city in the state, and I'm not sure in your research. So one, in your research, is there any other cities of our size? What are they doing, and what do they plan to do? And two, with some of these costs, projected costs, is there any opportunity for partnering with neighboring cities or areas, and can we reduce the cost? So can we reduce the cost by an inspector and say, maybe we don't need a full-time inspector, we just need a half-time inspector, and we don't need to pay the full-time, and we split that with another city, Davis or somebody else close by, and do it that way. So I'm just wondering on these costs, what could be managed when you look at a bigger picture and several cities partnering together?
Excellent question. Much of that's on the edible food recovery capacity space in particular. I think, Rose, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the largest portion of that estimate was related to the edible food recovery additional capacity. I believe even since we generated that original estimate, there's been some kind of changes around estimates there, which in lowering of the estimate. But we still don't have a lot of confidence in it because it's still very early on. So the primary activity for interagency or regional collaboration is in this edible food recovery requirement. You're absolutely correct with respect to inspection and or enforcement. That is a common strategy between agencies to make for some more cost effectiveness, though I've also seen some evidence that it can actually become a little less cost effective because you don't have as much control over the specific activities being undertaken by those individuals. And just interagency politics start to enter into play. So it just makes it a bit more administratively burdensome at that point. But those are definitely opportunities. With respect to the individual implementation costs, those vary across the state by agency size, not just in terms of what your own size or demographics are, but also your current status coming into SB 1383 and how many of those compliance elements you still need to fulfill. You're better off than most in that you don't need to fulfill so many. But to give you kind of a range of expectation, we have some clients where the proposals back from their haulers for their implementation are in the range of $3 to $5 a month increase for implementing the requirements on the residential ratepayer. So that's kind of what we're seeing as a somewhat typical response. We don't yet know what the results are going to look like for West Sacramento. It could very well be lower. I don't expect it will be higher, but please don't hold me to that because we haven't done the analysis yet. It's just a gut sense. So, we think you're going to be kind of on the lower range of what's needed because you don't have a tremendous amount left to do. Most of the opportunities will be around edible food recovery, procurement, and you're right, that inspection and enforcement portion, which is labor intensive.
Thank you.
Commissioner Criswell.
Yeah, I have a question around the food redistribution option. So first part is kind of, do we have any examples or any good ideas or something where the average person get their head around, like a good example of where that's happening or what could be done with it? And then kind of the flip side of that is, the bad part of that is, how do we handle the food safety aspect of that, of having spoiled food or something where it affects somebody's health or something?
Yeah, good questions. We know already that there are active edible food recovery organizations, in and around West Sacramento, and I think Paulina might be able to name a couple of them. On the food safety part of it, those same edible food generating businesses are going to be subject to, Department of Environmental Health type food safety inspections, and so all of the requirements around keeping and storing and refrigerating foods will still be required to be adhered to and inspected, also for the edible food recovery organizations themselves. So that's, that is essentially handled by existing activities, and fortunately won't become the city's responsibility. The city's responsibility is essentially to say, we're going to survey or canvass or analyze those businesses within the city that are required to comply, educate them about the requirements, and ensure that they are, if they're subject to the law, that they have agreements with edible food recovery organizations and can generate records. So, food safety inspection, typically run, on a county level, will be responsible for all of those nuances related to the food safety. And those entities throughout the state are already very aware about this law and the implications.
So does it require approval? Essentially, if I have some kind of leftover food and I'm saying, hey, I want to give it to this organization over here, does that need to be approved? Or does it just autonomously happen?
I don't believe there's an anticipation of a approval as much as thank you for demonstrating that you have an agreement with an edible food recovery provider. So that's kind of the city's decision point is, hey, does this agreement, is it with an eligible and reputable edible food recovery provider? And are you providing records? Great, you're set. In terms of approval for the process of donating edible food, that's where the food safety inspectors come into place. Show me your setup for how you're doing this. What's your protocol for keeping this? Where are they taking it from? Or rather, where are you storing it before it's being taken by the food provider or the edible food provider, the donation entity? So there's no specific, approvals required by the city about who, why, what, or where, simply a recognition that you're required to comply and you produced evidence of compliance and you can produce reporting of compliance when asked.
And so you're saying that includes food inspectors already, and we would just be expanding that model?
You don't even have to. The food inspection model is already kind of expanding on its own in response to this requirement.
I'm just kind of thinking of scenarios where now small restaurants or whatever, they can't throw it away anymore like they used to. So they kind of have an incentive to, hey, let's give this stuff away. But then there could be issues with it sitting there and at room temperature, and it becomes unsafe to eat. And so where's the kind of the part of the process that makes sure somebody doesn't think, oh great, that looks good, let me eat that, and then it's spoiled or something.
I can jump in a little bit on this. So the requirement is just to donate food that's actually edible. So if it was left out at room temperature, we wouldn't consider that edible. And so they wouldn't be out of compliance by not donating it. In terms of the restaurants that are covered, it's restaurants with 250 or more seats. So we're probably not looking at super small restaurants still. So hopefully that helps alleviate some of that concern.
Okay. It sounds like it's geared more towards a kind of larger operations at a larger scale. And then we won't worry about the food distribution for the smaller players.
Of course, they're always welcome to donate and participate in the program and set up a contract as well, but only the larger restaurants are required to comply.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Solorio, did you have another question?
I do. Yeah, I just wanted to, realizing kind of I wanted to take a really big step backwards kind of at the beginning. So just to make sure that I understand this. So what we're really aiming to do is get the organics out of the solid waste stream so that we can find a better way to process them so there's less greenhouse gases emitted, right? And not contaminate the other waste, and we could better dispose of that. It helps the waste stream that is non-organic, right?
What it does is it keeps the organic waste stream from going into landfills where it becomes covered and capped, and in those conditions produces methane as a potent greenhouse gas. So it doesn't really so much help the remaining garbage in any real way. It does preserve landfill space, but really what we're aiming to do, or the state's aiming to do under this law, is keep that methane generation.
Yeah, not cap it.
Generation.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. And so we have two processes to deal with this, and that is find uses for the waste while it's still edible, and also the other one seems to just be mulch so far. Compost
or mulch, or to the extent other types of energy production or gas production technologies become locally situated that you can take advantage of, that becomes the other
right. So those are our only options right now for it.
Correct.
Other than source reduction, which I think is a really important one.
Thank you, Rose.
Yes. Okay. And then thank you, Commissioner Criswell, for talking about the safety issue with the food donation. That was something I was going to ask, so thank you for that. And then did I see correctly that on the slide we have edible recovery, and then we also have food security as a separate item?
I think I may have just said that. I mean, it's like the whole intention is to get
they are the same thing.
Food and secure communities.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Chelina.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I'm wondering, as part of the procurement of potentially large amounts of mulch, if there would be potential opportunities for the city to incentivize, residential homeowners to convert from grass or something that requires water to a more drought-tolerant landscape. And I know there are programs that exist, but I wonder if that's maybe another way of paying for some of this through grants for those purposes. And it would be great if the mulch is given away for free, as Commissioner Green mentioned, year round with maybe some special events as well. But this would be a larger undertaking because you would need very large amounts of mulch to cover people's lawns, and some additional work that would go along with it. But could be a potential outlet for a larger amount than just people mulching a few flower beds.
Absolutely, and it's those kinds of policies that really are going to be needed in order to meet these requirements, those and others. So that's a helpful suggestion. Not a part of the current planning process, but happy to introduce that there's opportunity for other types of kind of co-beneficial city policies, both on the water reduction side and driving the procurement requirement for this organic waste material. So that's a helpful one. Thank you.
I'm actually going to jump in because I have a couple of comments. I'm and it's kind of along the lines of like what individuals can do. What about residents that compost themselves at home, like at-home compost? Could there be a way that they could report that to the city and that could be part of their metrics as a whole? I personally compost, plus I put stuff in my green waste, in my food waste, and I have friends that compost. So I know a lot of people in West Sac do have their at-home compost, which actually might attribute to part of that offset.
It's certainly a very cost-effective alternative. And from the standpoint of the law, certainly allowed. It would really only come to play as if you were an individual were saying, I don't want this green bin, take it away. Then, Paulina and her staff would say, well, demonstrate to us that you're eligible for a waiver from subscribing to the green bin service. And so that's where your kind of reporting of that would become necessary. To be clear, this law, unlike kind of prior recycling and diversion laws, isn't about tracking tonnages per se. It's about programs and services and demonstrating participation in those programs and services. And it's somewhat devoid of the what's our percentage diversion rate or how many tons are we collecting. So it's a welcome activity. I think to Rose's point, that fits in very well as the most cost effective along with source reduction as an alternative. It's certainly something that can be promoted. And if I'm not mistaken, Rose, isn't it part of the educational expectations too, that there's options around that?
Yeah, so for the annual educational notices to the residents and businesses, that we're options for mulching yourself are supposed to be included. Not mulching yourself, but using mulch. Yeah.
Well, I think my question was more not like, can you opt out of it? More so, could you contribute to being part of the city's sum total of what they're required to, I guess, like procure? Like you say, hey, look, I have a X amount of gallon compost bin. I mean, I was just a thought, because if you have if that little bit might go a long way. So
I like where you're going with it. Unfortunately, the way the law is expected is it really is like saying you must specifically buy or get for free from a rep. So you could actually contribute yours to the city, and that could count towards the overall procurement requirement. But I think that just the fact that it exists amongst residents and businesses and trying to count it that way, it's like you literally have to take it to the city and deliver it.
So you actually have to give it to them.
So that's the tough part around it. But I like the idea. I think maybe gives us an idea of how to leverage some of that with CalRecycle in the future. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Cardano. I'm sorry, Cardano. I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, by you and other residents already composting, and if we continue to encourage residents to do that, you are part of the state's overall goal, right? And there's a goal to reduce the amount of organics being landfilled. So if you're doing it at home or using the car, you are part of the solution. So I just want to recognize that.
And it kind of goes along with my other question. I know we talked about it and incentivizing for businesses, but and I think Rose kind of touched on it. Is incentivizing, like, I don't know, giving away like those little countertop compost bins and stuff that you can get from Waste Management. Is that all going to be part of the outreach? Is that like a plan, and that's why outreach costs are going to probably be a little bit more than would normally be expected, because they're not just a bunch of flyers. It's going to be like events and incentivizing and such.
Yeah, so we are reminding residents that you are eligible to get the free kitchen pail, which does, as you're pointing out, really help with the process of collecting your kitchen scraps. And we've advertised that through a variety of different ways. And when we have live events, that was one of the ways that we really promoted that program. So hopefully when things are normalized, we can have maybe an America Recycles Day event or Earth Day event. But one of the things, we talked a little bit about the incentive of reducing your waste is the same for a resident too. Somebody mentioned we have a variable can rate. It's based on the size of your trash cart. So the more you divert to your recycling and your organics containers, the more likely it is you can opt for the smallest container and save money. So there's an incentive there for people to divert more food scraps from their trash and move it into the organics cart to save some money on their trash bill.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more comment. Sorry, I was writing them down. I did want to parrot what Commissioner Green said, is that I do agree with the staff recommendations, but I also want to parrot what Commissioner Chelino said, is that I'm a little bit worried with the rate increases, which seem like they're probably going to be necessary since the state didn't provide any funding mechanism for this. But I'm concerned for that lower income portion of our community. And so maybe some sort of rate scale based on income or something like that might be helpful, or maybe even a reduction program, something like PG&E has for lower income people, where they have like reduction programs, so they only pay a set cost, a smaller cost. So that's just my last comment. All right, Commissioner Blondo.
Okay, I just want to speak to that really quickly. I'm sorry, I apologize. So there will be a new rate study conducted in fiscal year 21-22. So I've made a note that recommendation has come from this commission to explore some kind of a rate, subsidy or something like that for low-income households. So that'll be part of the conversation as we explore our rate study in this next fiscal year. And those are for rates that would go into effect in July.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And if I may just briefly add, Chair, not only that a great opportunity to explore how to develop those, but those are becoming more and more common. This is a very common question when we make these types of presentations. And one of the most common methodologies actually is saying, if you're eligible for PG&E's care program and enrolled in PG&E's care program, just simply present evidence of that and you can be eligible for a discount. The kicker, though, is that you can't use existing solid waste rates to then subsidize that subsidy. And so you would subsidize it via other funding sources. It could be through the franchise fee, or it could be the general fund. And we've conducted ranges of estimates of that for other municipalities. It can range from a few tens of thousands of dollars a year to hundreds of thousands a year, depending upon how many eligible participants are in the population and the magnitude of decrease 5, 10, 15, 20, 25% that you would offer. So there are pretty seamless pathways to follow with respect to that request.
Thank you. Commissioner Blondo?
Yeah, there's a couple of observations I have. So bear with me on this one. So if I wanted to make money off this law, I go to one city who needs to get rid of their mulch and organic, and they're giving it away for free. And I haul it to some other city that needs to buy it because it's in the procurement need. Is that absolutely likely, or is there something that prevents that? Because I could see that issue coming up and then somebody is exploiting the law to that extent, because a city wants to get rid of it and is willing to give it for free, but also all cities are required to buy it. So you're going to have this exploitation possible. So that's one question. And the other question was, is the penalty prescribed by the law? Meaning if the city decides, I'm going to give you 10 warnings in 2024 and charge you, can you do that? Or is it just, it's prescribed that you have to penalize and these are the rates?
Thank you for those questions. On the first one, in terms of the compost giveaway, thank you for that business idea. You've secured my retirement plan. No, I'm just kidding. Typically with a giveaway for residents, you would have some sort of residency restriction, and you also limit how much they're going to do. So you're not going to take in 100 cubic yards of compost only then to give it away to somebody in 10 cubic yard increments. It would usually be pretty apparent that it's for home or small business use. So you have administrative ways of handling that, but it's an important one to monitor for. That is a good question. With respect to the penalties, Rose, I know this one has changed over the course of the rulemaking, so I'm hoping you can answer that one.
Yeah, so the penalty amounts are set in the regulations equal to the administrative penalty amounts that you already have in place at the city. Which range in first, second, and third violations? So the first violation is max, I think, $100. I'm sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head.
But it ramps up, it gets into the hundreds pretty
Yes, quickly. There's first, second, and third violations.
Within a year period, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, so the third and subsequent violations are up to $500 per violation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Solorio?
Just a couple more thoughts to throw out there. I don't know if this actually is in your kind of purview of what you're doing, but you seem to be gathering ideas very gracefully. So I was just thinking about the mulch and just uses, and community gardens, are beloved, and we could probably stand to have a couple more, if not more. It's a great use of space, especially spaces that aren't easily used for other things. It's great for the community, and it would be great for mulch. So that was just a thought. And then those sites those gardens could be pickup locations as well. So not only are they using it, they can actually be a community gathering place where folks can come and get their free mulch. And they could even have classes on how to compost right there in the garden. So just some thoughts around that. And I think that might have been it.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we're the procurement one in particular, we very much are seeking ideas and opportunities to, try to saturate whatever can be done out there, still knowing it's not going to be enough to meet the state's, targets, but certainly helpful in things that we can explore further. Thank you.
Every little bit's going to help.
Yes.
And on top of that, I know the city of Sacramento actually has a really robust and active community garden program. And Paulina, I could give you the contact information for the man who runs that over there. I've done it with my Girl Scout troop. We've volunteered there before, but they're really great. And that's a great idea, Commissioner Solorio. All right, any more questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Did you have any, did you need any more comments from us or?
No, I don't think so. Okay. I think this covers the points of feedback we were looking for. We heard a few points of support for the recommendations on policy considerations if they move forward. If there was any objection to that, I think we're looking for, not necessarily an up or down vote, but kind of a nod of like, that seems like the right direction, because we'll be proceeding into the next steps in development of a compliance plan. And we will be back in front of the commission at some point in the fall as well.
So if anybody has any objections to any of the recommendations, I'd say now is a good time to voice those.
Or conversely, you could have, we aren't specifically asking for a motion, but you could move to support staff's recommendations with, the additional feedback. I think it seemed like most commissioners supported everything with the additional feedback on the rate specifically. If I got that correctly. I know not everybody commented on their support for each recommendations, but that could be an option too, is to do an action. Take an action on that.
Yep, we can take an action on it. So does anybody have a motion to support the recommendations with the commissioner's added comments?
I'll motion to accept the, what am I accepting? The recommendations with our feedback.
Okay, Commissioner Blondo moved. Does anyone want a second?
I will second
that.
Oh.
Okay, so we had Commissioner Petrie seconded. All right, okay. So everyone in favor, do you want to do a roll call vote, Ben?
Yeah, Commissioner Criswell?
Yeah, I vote in favor of accepting the staff recommendations.
Commissioner Green?
Aye.
Commissioner Petrie?
Aye.
Commissioner Chilano?
Aye.
Commissioner Blondo?
Aye.
Commissioner Solorio?
Aye.
Chair Cordano?
Aye. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. All right. So let's move on to our final item for the evening, General Administration Function Part 2. Our calendar, the next regular meeting of the Environment Utilities Commission is scheduled for August 9th, 2021. And then do we have any reports from the city staff?
Yes, Chair Cordano, I do. I just have some follow-up information. I believe it was Commissioner Chilano at the last meeting, I believe, was the one that asked me for some information about COVID impacts to waste management and also to the city's utility fund. So as expected, there was sort of a flip in tonnage amounts during COVID, especially because of the shelter in place and most people working from home. There was a pretty significant increase in the amount of trash in the residential community, a little over 1,000 tons more in 2020 over 2019, and an additional amount of 784 tons of organic waste, which I thought was interesting. And then recycling for some reason went down a little bit by 108 tons. And in the commercial sector, we saw a significant decrease, mostly due to closures and or businesses just not operating at full capacity. A lot of restaurants were doing to-go and takeout only, so the amount of waste they were generating was significantly less. So Waste Management is reporting a little over 1,370 ton decrease in the commercial trash amounts. And they also had a decrease in recycling of 124.6 and 87.6 tons of organics. We suspect that commercial sector will ramp up slowly, and it has started to increase, but it may be that the commercial trash generation will take a long time to fully rebound. I mean, we know in West Sacramento there's some businesses that are not reopening, and then others are changing just the way they do business. So I think that, moving forward, there's going to be a lot of businesses that are going to have work from home policies that they may not have had before. So we may continue to see a trend where residential trash is increasing and then the commercial is sort of staying lower. But it remains to be seen how things progress. On the utility side of things, the city has a policy like other cities in Yolo County that we lien a property for non-payment. So if you don't pay your utility bills, whether you're a resident or a commercial property owner, it will go on your tax bill. So the city never really loses revenue from non-payment because we'll always get the money from the county tax bill. What was interesting, though, in talking to utility billing, we actually had about 10% less of our accounts go to the tax roll, as we call it. So in 2020, we had 539 accounts end up being liened versus 486 in 2021. And that's for a February to February period. So that was an interesting thing to note, that we actually had less people being liened. But we did see a loss of revenue in that the city decided to suspend late penalties. So in order to help a lot of the lower income or people who lost their jobs during this, we did not charge late penalties as we're allowed to do under code. So that actually was about a $350,000 revenue loss by making that decision. But, it's something that gave residents a little bit of assistance when they couldn't pay their bills, during times of being out of work. So that's what I have on that topic. If you have any questions about that, I'm open to answer those now.
Should I just?
Do
Yeah.
you have any questions? Or is that what you're looking for?
Oh, well, I was waiting for the chair to call on us, but
sorry.
Okay.
I can't always see who's got it. Okay, we'll go with Commissioner Cellino.
Thanks. Thank you, Paulina. Yeah, I had made that request and really appreciate that information. Two things, I think we'll see how kind of recycling and trash rebounds as the state opens back up, but it could really inform some of the education and outreach that we were just talking about, because we think of commercial generators as being the larger generators, and maybe in aggregate they are, but if everyone's working from home and creating more trash, that education is going to need to be focused there, maybe more so than pre-COVID. And then the second thing, there are supposed to be federal funds coming to help with bill arrearage through the state budget. And it seems like it's going to be about $1 billion. It's not clear how that's going to get distributed to utilities and different public agencies. So I'm sure you're maybe tracking that already. But if there are, it sounds like the only revenue loss was from the fees. And so it's an interesting oxymoron or conundrum that because the city didn't lose a lot of funds, they may not be as eligible for any of the federal funds that are coming, but just an important thing to be aware of.
So I know our finance department is very in tune with all the different federal funding that's available around COVID.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Blondo?
Yeah, I think I made the comment on our last meeting that there's the concern that more people would end up working from home, and that's the direction we're having and the trash would shift. But can you how much did we lose in just because of late fees? Was that $357,000?
$350,000 in a 12-month period. Yeah, so that's typical of the amount of revenue the city earns from late fees, and that's all utilities, water, sewer, and trash.
It still seems like a large amount to me, but yeah. So I don't know what for that thing. I could see folks at the lower end still needing some relief in the future. I know it's a loss of revenue, but until there's full recovery at some point, I think they might need that ongoing. So I would recommend to evaluate that in the future.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't ask the person I was talking with if there was plans to remove that. I haven't heard that lately. But I will take your comment back to them and encourage them to continue to offer that as long as we can.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Criswell, is that just a thumbs up or is it a raised hand? Thumbs up, okay.
Just thumbs up, yeah.
All right.
Kind of like a virtual nod of the head.
All right. Any more questions? Okay. So future agenda item requests by the Environment Utilities Commission. Does anybody have any requests for future agenda items? No. Paulina, I have one. Remember when we talked about the owls and for the pest control? Can we get an update on that? I'm just intrigued to hear if they kept it going during COVID and how it's been working. So
I haven't had a chance lately to ask about that, but yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Parks Department hired a company. Can't remember the name of the company, but they do pest control by installing owl boxes. And I want to say they're barn owls, but don't put me on that either. But long story short is that was one of the things that we've tried in, I think, the Bright Park area and one or two other parks. And for a long time, they weren't being utilized by owls, but I think that I'll ask about that. I had these grand ideas of putting cameras in them and all this kind of stuff, and there wasn't plenty available.
I know, I was just thinking about it the other day, and I'm like, I wonder what happened with that.
Yeah, I'll find out and have some find out what's going on and report back next time.
Great, thank you.
I would just add, if there's any worthwhile field trips that you can think of, Chair Cordano, you've been working with this commission much longer than me. So now that things are kind of opening, it would be nice for us to get out into the community if it's, related to what we're doing, even maybe on the subjects that we've had the two presentations on. Could be interesting.
Yeah, we could. I don't know if we've done them in the past, Chair Cordano. Did some of the commissioners do the tour of the recycling facility?
I think only one got. I think one got to do it. The rest of us couldn't make it. So
yeah, we can do. I can reach out again to Waste Management. I think it would also be beneficial once the county's open to having people tour again, which I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. It should be pretty soon, I would suspect. They can also offer a tour of the composting facilities that they're building at the landfill and talk a little more about the different types of composting processes that they're using.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I mean, any tours that would be available to commission staff and city staff and more of the inner workings would be really interesting. The port comes to mind also, any kind of industry that we have here, and environmental, activities on like the owls, things that we can just kind of go lay eyes on,
right?
That we wouldn't know about.
Right. Will do, for sure.
Commissioner Green.
Sorry, I had to find my mic button. I just wanted to share real quick. You guys had some wonderful suggestions, but I did have the opportunity to tour the George Christoph water treatment plant. I think it was about 2 years ago. And that was a really awesome experience. So I would highly recommend that to you all as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Criswell, did you have something?
Yes, I concur with I like the idea of doing the tours of certain things that pertain to our commission. And so I'm on board with that. And also I would recommend that we come back to this as a commission, however many months from now or a year from now, when this program has kind of been put out there and made a splash, and kind of see how it's going and come back to it and readdress it at a later time.
Yeah, Commissioner Criswell, we will be back definitely in October with the draft ordinance and planning on having some more information about rate impacts and costs at that point.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Blondo?
Just a question on our future meeting with the executive order being lifted. Are we still virtual? What is the status of our meetings in the future?
I don't have an update on that. I don't know if our commission clerk has an update on any of that information. I know that the city executive team and department heads are working on a reopening plan. And I know that how we deal with our in-person meetings is part of that plan. So I think we'll be in person in August, but I'm not 100% sure where we are. Once that is fully fleshed out, we'll let everyone know. But I don't know. Ben, do you have any other updates on that?
I believe council is actually going to meet in person in July, from the last I have heard. So I expect commissions to follow suit shortly thereafter.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
All right, thank you. If none of the commissioners have anything else, we will adjourn the meeting. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.